Hello, fellow mech warriors. I'm Adam, and this is another solo episode of The Memory Core. One of the most common topics I see with BattleTech are players asking what mechs they should use, what factions they should play, and how to paint them. Although they are interrelated, the painting part really seems to vex them the most. And I get it. A lot of players new to the game may come from other IPs, or maybe even an historical frame of reference. One only needs to look at the numerous codices for Warhammer or a stack of Osprey books to get an idea of what they should paint and how. It can suddenly be disorienting without that same level of guidance when you come over to BattleTech. Hey, I like these 4 mechs. What faction should I go with? Okay, but what unit? What shade of blue should this be? And the honest answer, despite how much consternation it may cause, is that it may not really matter. Which should be liberating. BattleTech has always had some level of formalized paint schemes, or livery. Written descriptions of key units appear in the original House books, the first of which was House Kurita, published in 1987. Then the Camo Specs book, published in 1988, gave visual depictions of units with what appeared to be trace and colorized illustrations based on Dwayne Luce's work in TRO 3025. So cool! Maybe pick a favorite faction, pick some mechs, then a unit. Maybe reverse that order and use mechs that you like, then faction, then unit. Maybe unit first, because they have a sick logo and name. Looking at you, Death Commandos. Maybe you picked up one of the Lance boxes, either modern or in vintage 88 lead. So that's your starting point. Where to from there? So many options. What the hell do you do? And the answer is, whatever the hell you want. Okay, let me back up and give a bit of context here. In many ways, BattleTech plays differently than some other games. Yes, there are some faction limitations with tech and units, but that is only if you are really playing a deep-in-the-weeds game. There aren't a lot of hard and fast rules for how your faction actually affects your gameplay. For the most part, you can play a game with any unit of any era in a tech-agnostic fashion because of how battle value works. And I'm not going to rehash those arguments about battle value here. Way in the beginning of the game, tech was a level playing field for everyone. With salvage, fluff, or whatever, you could justify anyone using any mech. There are modern optional rules for lances, and stars if you're a dirty clanner, or abilities assigned to regiments or other formations that go back to the Battle Force and the Field Manual series. However, it doesn't really appear, at least to me and in my experience, that many players utilize those rules in smaller games. And smaller games is the key here. You're usually looking at Lance v. Lance, maybe 2 Lances versus a Star, or Star v. Star. You're not looking at big organized battalion versus battalion or regiment or galaxy-sized formations on the battlefield. The original setting of the universe in 3025, towards the tail end of the Third Succession War, was one of small unit action. States and their respective militaries were exhausted. Industrial output was meager. Somehow, everyone was able to keep up with their losses, but that might be more because any military asset was so valuable they would readily retreat, thus decreasing the lethality of combat rather than sufficient manufacturing capability. Powers had been shifting away from federal governments and more to mech warriors who were trained and owned their battle mechs. Sometimes they would strike off on their own as mercenaries. Other times this would lead to them being given land grants, which would help generate revenue to maintain mechs. Land grants would tie them to the land and a certain baron, duke, or successor lord. That was all fine and dandy as long as one didn't lose their mech. Hopefully this is sounding familiar, because what you are getting is feudalism, and mech warriors in particular as knights. The end result is a certain amount of loosening of regulations by sheer exhaustion, random replacement parts, being able to repaint mechs only when you can afford it, or can get the actual paint to do so. Also, for those who can, you have the ability and leeway to do your own thing, much like a knight would have their own crest on their shield. Perhaps this was even encouraged. Not officially, mind you, but by the culture. A mech warrior may be induced to sort of peacock as a way to stand out and build a reputation. Units along borders may have clashed regularly in small skirmishes, raids, and other counter-raids. which means certain mechs and warriors may become familiar to each other. A flashy paint scheme might attract the attention of prospective employers, the media, citizens, or superiors. Conversely, it could ward off enemies if your reputation was fierce enough. The bounty hunter and Natasha Kerensky come to mind. Certainly, a governing structure that is feudalistic means it is in the interest of an individual to have a reputation that precedes them. I would imagine that the smaller the unit, the more individualized the paint schema will be. In fact, only in the largest, most formal units would they be uniform, such as elite units like the Sword of Light. Maybe small mercenary formations would play at being professional to begin with, utilizing a standard livery. Over time, though, small decorations or painted slogans, kill markers, or nose art creeps in, gradually giving way to the mech warrior's own style, to say nothing of pirates, outlaws, or solitary mech warriors. Throughout many of the early scenario books and Technical Readout 3025, there are dozens of descriptions of individuals painting their machines in unique ways. Some would be simple, such as Thompson Tommy Dale of the Davian Guards and his dark gray battlemaster, Dark Death. Edgy, I know. Others may choose a single defining characteristic, as with Michael Jones of the St. Ives Armored Cavalry, whose Vindicator, appropriately named St. Ives Blues, featured a large silver trumpet on the chest. Of course, nothing stops individuals from using ostentatiously bright colors and patterns such as the rifleman of Bright Tomlinson of Cranston Snore's Irregulars. And finally, a decoration may be an affirmation of your confidence, as with Catherine Garrick of the Regulan Hussars in her Awesome, which proudly displays the words, "Come and get it." It is your mech, after all, and should be an extension of your personality. Outside of individualist patterns, BattleTech also seemed to place an emphasis on camouflage. Whether it was in the color plates of MechWarrior 1st Edition, illustrations throughout other publications like Battle Technology, or even the Ralpart the Lance boxes with painted examples in the back, camo dominated. Many descriptions of units in the original House books do make mention of parade schemes, but that appropriate camo is used when in the field. So even if you're not using a certain signature, practicality takes precedence. Certainly, you could argue that camo would be ineffective on such large machines, but with improved sensors come improved fusion power jamming or countermeasures. And despite the game itself taking place on boards that may only be 1 to 2 kilometers wide, in the depth of ruined cities and maneuvers across the planet, any benefit to hiding your forces would be viable. While certain factions may have specific camo patterns as they do in the real world, it doesn't seem so faction-specific as it would when being presentable for a parade. So that's the inner sphere. But what about the clans? Why not have waves and waves and waves and waves and waves of Clan Wolf Beta Galaxy? Some clans are more lax in their personal uniforms than others. Clan Wolf is described as having more room for self-expression, whereas the Jade Falcons are more regimented. Despite that, during Operation Revival, the Falcons clearly went glam, as this excerpt from page 24 of the Jade Falcon sourcebook describes. The Falcons went to great lengths to make their appearance as fearsome as possible. They painted their mech exteriors in a wild variety of schemes, ranging from amazing camouflage patterns to almost psychedelic combinations of colors and designs. Elemental armor also received special attention, the Galaxy's Falcon emblem appearing on the helmet, shoulders, and back of most. Some commanders even attached synthetic feathers to their armor. Certainly this gives the impression that parade schemes were used only on formal occasions. Turning to historical parallels, you have a force such as the Gai Satai of antiquity, a group of Gallic warriors who fought in the buff. Your frontal lobe may reason that fighting naked is silly, but your limbic system is asking if those dudes in the nude with big swords know something you don't. There is a reason why modern militaries don't go out to battle in their dress uniforms. I imagine even the armies of the Napoleonic era or the US Civil War would have used camo if they knew about it, or their military doctrine wasn't so focused on formations. After all, even the French got rid of their bold blue and red uniforms at the start of World War I and made way to a desaturated sky blue tone that served them better in the trenches. So what's the whole point of this video? The main takeaway is that BattleTech allows for great freedom of expression, perhaps greater than other miniature-based wargames. Your miniatures are representative of you, and you should feel free to paint how you want, whether it is your mercenary group or a house unit. those minis can be as wild or as subdued as you wish. And by all means, if you want to paint that unit in a specific parade scheme, you certainly can. You should do what makes you feel happy, but you should feel that that is your choice and that there's no limits on this because someone else in the community feels that everything should be a parade scheme. I remember at one point a poster in a Facebook group was concerned that if you didn't paint your force in the same scheme, how would you tell whose miniature is whose? Well, I understand the concern. BattleTech is not a game played with a lot of miniatures. You shouldn't have much trouble keeping track of which one belongs to you. And because of the easy point system of building a force by battle value, it is simple to swap around units and miniatures from a larger collection, because you're not going to be using 60 miniatures at a time. And let's be honest, you have to have a very special group of players and a lot of time if you're going to actually use a whole battalion or more of mechs painted in the same scheme. Maybe you're going to do a week or month-long battle, but you've got to have the space available for that. So get creative. Cut loose. Look for inspiration and maybe try things you wouldn't have otherwise. Experiment with colors you wouldn't have given much thought to before. Maybe even paint a mech up like a mantis shrimp. This is a call to have fun, so just have fun. Take risks. Try something new. Don't be afraid of mistakes. All of these miniatures can be repainted, easily reprimed, or even stripped in various ways. Anyone who is going to give you grief over how well or badly painted your miniatures are, they're probably not really worth playing with. Unless you're Dan, and I give him grief all the time.